Hello, my children. It's Auntie Jen. I've really missed you guys. I had terrible sinuses, and yeah, I was a little bit sick. But I'm all back now, and I have a very special story for you this evening. So, stories sometimes your mommy will know the story because she was read that same story as a little girl, and your granny will know that story too because she read it when she was a little girl. And stories get passed on from one person to the other, and this is one of those stories that you know, your mummy knows because she grew up with it as a little girl, or your daddy, and yeah, your grannies, the next generation after it, they know. And the reason I can tell you why, so we're going to read this little delightful book, and yes, I need my granny eyes, please. It's called The Tale of Two Bad Mice, and it's by Beatrix Potter. Beatrix Potter is a very well-known author. She wrote many delightful books. You've seen Peter Rabbit, the movie, right? She wrote that book. Anyway, so I'm very excited to read it. When you go into the beginning of the book, you'll get this page with all this gobbledygook writing about copyrights and all these addresses and everything. And usually you just skip past that, but there's important information on there. So this book was first published in 1904. That's what this information is telling me, which means that this book is 101 years old. Isn't that amazing? Okay, so this book has got a dedication. The dedication says, for W.M.L.W., the little girl who had the doll's house. I don't know who W.M.L.W. is. That's interesting. Oh, it does look like a doll's house. Look how cute that is. Once upon a time, there was a very beautiful doll's house. It was red brick with white windows, and it had real muslin curtains, and a front door and a chimney. It belonged to two dolls called Lucinda and Jane. At least it belonged to Lucinda, but she never ordered meals. Jane was the cook, but she never did any cooking because the dinner had been bought ready-made in a box full of shavings. There were 2 red lobsters and a ham, a fish, a pudding, and some pears and oranges. They would not come off the plates. They were extremely beautiful. One morning, Lucinda and Jane had gone out for a drive in the doll's perambulator. There was no one in the nursery, and it was very quiet. Presently there was a little scuffling, scratching noise in the corner, near the fireplace, where there was a hole in the skirting board. Tom Thumb popped out his head for a moment, and then popped it back in again. Tom Thumb was a mouse. Sometimes the pages get sticky. Oh, there you go. A minute afterwards, Lucinda Munzer, his wife, put her head out too, and when she saw there was no one in the nursery, she ventured out on the oilcloth under the coal box. Handsome Munzer. What an interesting name. The doll's house stood at the other side of the fireplace. Tom Thumb and Handsome Munzer went cautiously across the hearthrug. They pushed the front door. It was not fast. Fast is an old age word. What it means is it wasn't stuck or it wasn't closed. So that's an old age word that we used to use. See? Which means the door could open. And it did. Tom Thumb and her son Hansa Mansa went upstairs and peeped into the dining room, and they squeaked with joy. Such a lovely dinner was laid out on the table. There were tin spoons and lead knives and forks and 2 dolly chairs. So convenient. That must be like mouse heaven. Tom Thumb set to work at once to carve the ham. It was beautiful, shiny yellow, streaked with red. The knife crumpled up and hurt him, and he put his finger in his mouth. "It's not boiled enough. It's hard. You have a try, Hansa Mansa." Hansa Mansa stood up in her chair and chopped at the ham with another lead knife. "It's as hard as the hams at the cheesemonger's," she said. The ham broke off the plate with a jerk and rolled under the table. "Leave it alone," said Tom Thumb. "Get me some fish, Hansa Mansa." Hansa Mansa tried every tin spoon in turn. The fish was glued to the dish. Then Tom Thumb lost his temper. He put the ham in the middle of the floor and hit it with the tongs with a shovel with a bang, crash, smash, smash. The ham flew into little pieces, for underneath the shiny paint was made nothing but plaster. There was no end to the rage and disappointment of Tom Thumb and Hansa Mansa. They broke up the pudding, the lobsters, the pears, the oranges. As the fish would not come off the plate, they put it in the red-hot, crinkly paper fire in the kitchen, but it would not burn either. Tom Thumb went up the kitchen chimney and looked out at the top. There was no soot. While Tom Thumb was up the chimney, Hansa Mansa had another disappointment. She found some tiny canisters on the dresser, labeled rice, coffee, sago, but when she turned them upside down, there was nothing inside except red and blue beads. Then those mouse set to work to do all the mischief they could, especially Tom Thumb. He took Jane's clothes out of the chest of drawers in her bedroom and he threw them out on top of the window floor. But Hansa Mansa had a frugal mind. After pulling half the feathers out of Lucinda's bolster, which means pillow, she remembered that she herself was in want of a feather bed. With Tom Thumb's assistance, she carried the bolster downstairs and across the hearth rug. It was difficult to squeeze the bolster into the mouse hole, but they managed it somehow. Clever mice. When Hansa Mansa went back and fetched a chair, a bookcase, a bird cage, and several small odds and ends, the bookcase and the bird cage refused to go into the mouse hole. Hansa Mansa left them behind the coal box and went to fetch a cradle. Cradle? Hansa Mansa was just returning with another chair when suddenly there was a noise of talking outside on the landing. The mice rushed back into their hole and the dolls came into the nursery. There they are. What a sight met the eyes of Jane and Lucinda. Lucinda sat upon the upset kitchen stove and just stared, and Jane leant against the kitchen dresser and just smiled, but neither of them made any remark. The bookcase and the birdcage were rescued from under the coal box, but Hansa Mansa has got the cradle and some of Lucinda's clothes. Look, it's a little baby mouse. Can you see? Look how cutesy that is. She had a baby. She also had some very useful pots and pans and several other things. The little girl that the doll's house belonged to said, "I will get a doll dressed up like a policeman." Oh dear. But the nurse said, "I will set up a mouse trap." Oh my. She has lots of babies now. That's what happens with mice. So, that is the story of the two bad mice. But they were not so very, very naughty at all, because Tom Thumb paid for everything that he broke. He found a crooked sixpence under a hearthrug, and upon Christmas Eve he and Hansa